Monday, and welcome back to the Lorden Arts channel. I'm John Lorden. Thank you so much for spending some time with us here today. Case Cracked is the show where we look into a mystery and what are the critical pieces that help solve that mystery. Today's case was actually suggested by Mrs. Brain Scratch, and it asks the question, is this the perfect robbery? The safety of our banks here in the United States is something most of us give very little thought to. In 2021, none of us have memories of Black Tuesday, the day in 1929 when our stock market crashed epically, losing billions of dollars. For Argentinians, this situation is something they've had to deal with several times in recent history. In 2001, their citizens lost whole fortunes when their national banking system collapsed. At the time, Argentina's peso was equal to the US dollar, but when the collapse hit, all accounts almost immediately lost most of their value. This led to distrust of the banks. To combat it, Argentinians started to store valuables in safety deposit boxes at the banks, feeling that even if the money system collapsed, they would still have objects of monetary value to see them through the hard times. January 13th, 2006 started out like any other day in San Isidro. This historic Greater Buenos Aires city just happens to house one of Argentina's largest, wealthiest banks, known as the Banco Rio. At 12:38 p.m. that day, police received a call that they had a robbery in progress at the bank. Within moments, officers arrived to discover that their bank robbers were still inside. To their surprise, almost immediately, the bank's only security guard was sent out. He still had his gun, but his bullets were in his pockets. 10 minutes later, another hostage was released. Officers learned that they had 5 bank robbers wearing disguises and 23 hostages. The next hostage to be released was led out by a masked robber. When radio contact was established with the inside of the bank, officers were introduced to the masked man, who called himself Walter. In the following hours, 100 police officers surrounded the bank, while news reporters set up cameras at every vantage point. When officers talked to Walter, whom they had nicknamed the man in the gray suit due to the clothes that he wore, they were told that the hostages were being treated well. They even sang happy birthday to one bank employee when the robbers noticed his cell phone ringing with calls and messages full of birthday wishes. By 3:30 that afternoon, Walter insisted that everyone was hungry and pizzas needed to be ordered. The lead officer on the scene stated, quote, "We played his game because we wanted to earn his trust. However, when we had the food in hand and we called to tell him, he did not answer us." The inside of the bank was eerily silent. At 7 p.m., special forces made their move and entered the bank to find a very confusing scene. Their hostages were not only unharmed, but had been split between 3 floors and locked into rooms. The bank robbers were nowhere to be found. Investigators discovered that their robbers had left very little evidence behind. The bank manager and head teller stated that they had been forced to open the safe where US dollars and pesos were taken, but the real haul was in the basement. There, they found that 143 out of 400 safety deposit boxes kept at the location had been broken into, with their contents of jewelry, precious metals, and stones now gone. Breaking into the boxes would not have been an easy task and should have created a lot of noise. Further inspection of the room showed investigators how the robbers had accomplished it. They found a specially made tool that had been used to crack the boxes open with little effort or noise. They also found a battery pack and the weapons that were used to subdue the hostages. The weapons would be later determined to be toy guns. Taped to the wall was a note, quote, "In a neighborhood of rich people, without weapons or grudges, it's just money, not love." The thieves had stolen millions in cash and valuables without real weapons and seemed to have accomplished the perfect robbery. Investigators had plenty of details, but they still had no idea where the intruders were. None of the hostages knew, and both exits to the bank had been covered with no one entering or exiting during the actual robbery. After a few hours of inspection, a file cabinet was moved, and revealed was a sheet of iron that was bolted to a basement wall. This sheet covered a hole that led to a tunnel that connected to the municipal drainage system and emptied into the La Plata River. A day after the robbery, credit cards that had been stolen from the bank were found lying near storm drains all over the area, forcing police to look at every exit point. Soon, they were bogged down in false leads as people who found the cards attempted to use them. Each time they found that none of those were the actual bank robbers. After weeks of searching, investigators had no more leads to follow. Luckily, fate would step in. 5 weeks into their investigation, the wife of a known local thief named Ruben Alberto de la Torre, known as Beto, called to say that her husband was involved in the Banco Rio robbery. Beto had once belonged to a group of thieves known as the Super Banda that robbed banks in Argentina in the 80s and 90s. She told police to hurry, as Beto was in the process of fleeing the country with his new girlfriend. When officers pulled him over, that's exactly what he was doing. Quote, "I never thought she would do that," he exclaimed. Knowing the jig was up, Beto gave up his accomplices, and his wife was able to identify them from photos. As they began to look into their suspects, investigators would find that this was one eclectic group. The mastermind behind the plot was an artist named Fernando Araujo. One night, just after the turn of the century, Araujo sat talking with his friend Sebastian Garcia Bolster. Bolster came from a family of engineers and loved to tinker as well as fix all types of small engines. Araujo was thinking about a recent botched bank robbery in the town of Villa Ramallo, where police mishandling caused the death of 2 hostages and 1 gunman. As they discussed this, Araujo made the comment that it would be crazy to rob a bank, but not leave, to disappear through a hole. Bolster agreed. Years later, in 2004, Araujo approached Bolster with an idea. The Ramallo massacre had never left his mind, and neither had the possibility of successfully robbing a bank. Araujo now lived in a loft and taught martial arts to pay his bills while he cultivated different high-end strains of marijuana. He had a plan in mind, but told his friend, "I need technical things. You will be my Lucius Fox," he said, referring to the character from the Batman comic books and movies that develops Batman's tools. Even though Bolster was reluctant to help, he eventually changed his mind. He had watched his middle-class family lose their money in the bank collapse and saw this as an opportunity to get even. He had only one stipulation. There was to be no violence, and guns were not to be used. He would go on to be known as the Engineer and would devise an ingenious tunnel system and getaway plan for a scheme Araujo called the Donatello Project, after the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. Now, Araujo needed a team. From there, he recruited a veteran bank robber known only as Doc and one of his associates, named Ruben Alberto de la Torre. Doc also put them in touch with the man who would be their investor, a thief known in Uruguay as the Spider-Man, Luis Mario Vitete Silanes. Finally, Friday the 13th, in January of 2006, the robbery began. Each member entered the bank separately in disguise, while Bolster waited in the tunnel that he had carefully excavated over months under the bank. The fake guns were used to gain control of the hostages, while Vitete talked with officers and became known as the man in the gray suit, or Walter. Then a hole was carefully opened in a wall leading to Bolster's tunnel. Their engineer was now in. All interactions with police were a smokescreen that bought the group time for Bolster to use a special tool he had engineered called the power cannon to open as many safe deposit boxes as possible. When time was up, an hour and a half later, 140 of the boxes had been opened and looted. Walter then called for pizza, and the thieves disappeared through the hole Bolster came through, patching it behind them. From there, 2 Zodiac inflatable boats went 10 blocks through the municipal drainage system, a system that typically wouldn't have a water level high enough for the boats to work in, but the engineer built a dam to take care of that. The thieves exited and loaded everything into a getaway van. A day later, Bolster went back and spread the credit cards to confuse police as to exactly where they had exited. The robbers then divvied up their loot and went their separate ways. That is, until Beto's wife called the police. At their trial, 600 witnesses testified, and all of the accused pleaded their innocence. Vitete, the man in the gray suit, was given 8 years in prison, but due to a loophole, served only 4 years before being deported to Uruguay and told never to return to Argentina. The rest were given short prison sentences, with Bolster's being the smallest at only 25 months, related to charges for the tunnel construction. Today, all of Araujo's gang are out of prison and have moved on with their lives. That now includes many books and even movies. They are considered to be folk heroes. As to the millions that disappeared, no one is talking, and most of the loot is still missing to this very day. Case cracked. I would like to thank GQ Magazine, CNN, The Washington Post, Wikipedia, Clarin.com, Infobay.com, the LA Times, and the Duolingo podcast, El Gran Robo Argentino. Thanks to Mrs. Brainscratch for both helping with research and suggesting today's case. Of course, the biggest thank you goes to Christy Arnhart for the majority of the research and writing it all up. Here she is to discuss it with us now. You know, Christy, occasionally these scripts sound almost like an action movie, and this one really fires on that cylinder, but maybe more so. Like, this might be one of my favorite stories that we've had on Case Cracked in a while now.
It's been one of my favorites to look into. I really enjoyed this one.
Yeah, well, tell us a little more about that. What's so different about this one for you?
Well, with Case Cracked, we want to look at the evidence. And in so many of the cases that we handle nowadays, it's genetic genealogy, or it's the same techniques that we hear about all the time.
Yeah.
This was completely different from anything that I had ever read about. These men, they thought about every detail in this. And I was really impressed, especially with no one getting hurt and going into it knowing no one was going to get hurt.
Yeah, there's a lot of creativity, and of course, I'm a big comic book fan, and it's interesting that they would be motivated by some of the same comics. I mean, I love Batman, and to know that people that are committing a crime are being influenced by the same thing that I look to as, Batman helps promote justice. In a way, I know he's a vigilante, but he's still helping get the bad guys. It's not like they were saying they were fans of the Joker. They were fans of Batman and Lucius Fox, who would build tools for Batman. I know that we had some limited sources. I know you had to work really hard to pull this story together. And sometimes we run into discrepancies with the story. Can you tell us about whatever discrepancies we bumped into here?
Yeah, and we actually had fewer this time than we have on a lot of other cases. A lot of the newspapers wanted to report that there was anywhere between $8 and $20 million stolen. Okay. I never really could nail that number down. I saw 20 million more than any other, so I stuck with that.
I bet it's hard to estimate because of the fact that they're safe deposit boxes. And I don't know if it's normal for banks to catalog what's actually in the boxes necessarily. So I don't
think so.
Yeah, getting those types of values, I think, would probably be pretty tough. So I'm not surprised to see there's a bit of a range on that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. There was also a getaway driver that I left out of the script, but that's the part he played, was getaway driver. He didn't come into the story any more than that. So to cut down on the amount of people that we had to deal with.
Yeah, this is a pretty big story. So he's the guy that drove the van basically after they got out of the water system. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. One of the biggest discrepancies, and it actually became a conversation point between my wife and I when she was first telling me about this case, was, were they actually toy guns or were they not? And one of the questions she had brought up to me was, do you think even if they were toy guns that they should still be prosecuted the same? Because you're acting like you're threatening someone's life. And what's the difference of this is a real gun versus this is a toy gun from the victim's perspective. There's literally no difference.
That's true.
I mean, either way, if you decided not to fire, it's an object that you think can harm you, and you're being intimidated into certain actions. So Mrs. Brain Scratch did a little more digging. She fell in love with the Duolingo podcast. I think she power binged it in like a few days. She was all over me to get this episode made. I think just because she wants to hear this story again. But she found some more interesting information about the toy gun aspect.
Oh, good.
So the Special Forces unit that inspected the bank on site, supposedly they determined that the guns are toys. The robbers maintain they definitely used fakes, and they carried that through even interrogations that they went through after they were caught. They were just 100%, these were fakes the whole time. Mm-hmm. But during the trial, things got a little different. The trial happened in 2010. Some of the witnesses testified that they were hit by the butt of the weapons, and they knew the guns were real because of being hit by the butt of a shotgun. Like you're going to tell that there's weight and mass to that, and it's not a plastic empty shell.
Yeah.
Plus, we had a professional there, which was the bank security guard. He actually works as a cop also. This was kind of another gig for him when he's off duty. He testifies he knows what a real shotgun sounds like when it's being loaded. And he was even naming the type of shotguns that supposedly these guys were carrying around. So It's interesting because we've got these witnesses just super conflicting on the information, but we've got experts from the investigation saying they were toys, they were left behind. We've got the robbers saying we used fake guns throughout the whole thing. I'm hearing one of the robbers said that maybe one of the other guys actually brought a real gun, but he wasn't supposed to, kind of just had it on him. So there's a possibility that there was a weapon there. Thankfully, obviously, it seems like for the most part, the weapons didn't get used. It's certainly upsetting to hear that someone was hit by the butt of anything, if it was a toy gun or a real gun. In 2012, there was an appeals court that heard some things about this case. And basically they came back with there was no evidence that real guns were used. So at that point, everyone's sentence was reduced to half of the original sentences. I think it has to do a little bit with this aspect of in the original trial, it looked like they were kind of prosecuting them as if they were real guns. But then when it went to the Court of Appeals, they were like, you've got no proof that these were real guns. So we're reducing these sentences.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. Araujo, this guy's a character. Can you tell us a little more about him?
He certainly was a character. Now, from the Duolingo podcast, they talk about a moment where he's talking with an associate of his, and it says that with a gleam in his eye, he told this guy that he was in contact with Tom Cruise's production company, claiming they were interested in making a movie about the heist.
Now, my wife told me about that aspect as well, and from what I understand, there is movies. I don't know if any have come out yet or if they're just in development, but
they've got a lot of projects going on.
Yeah. But apparently none of them actually have to do with Tom Cruise's production company. And he also seemed to have an interesting taste in music, huh?
Yes, he did. While he was working on this whole heist, he loved to listen to Mozart and Beethoven. And for creativity, he listened to Bank Robber by The Clash.
Interesting. And when we talk about this aspect about the guns and, not using real guns, there's some lyrics in this song that might actually tie into that a little bit. These lyrics are, my daddy was a bank robber, but he never hurt nobody. He just loved to live that way. And he loved to steal your money. It almost sounds like a limerick, doesn't it?
It does. That really fits this situation.
Also, there is so much additional detail. If you guys are interested in this story at all, if you are bilingual or want to learn Spanish, please check out the Duolingo podcast. But you also pointed out a very good article over at GQ. Can you give us just a little more detail from that?
So from the GQ article, it says that one big chore on Bolster's list was figuring out how to crack into the safe deposit boxes. Easy enough, he figured, if he had one to practice on. So Araujo set out for a neighboring branch in Banco Rio, where he asked to rent a box. made note of the brand, and then bought a few from the manufacturer, and they used those.
I mean, it's just this, they're just thinking of every possible angle, but that is
He
just
did.
brilliant. Yeah, I'm going to go rent one of these boxes. You won't be able to remove it from the bank, but you could certainly find some type of identifying marker on the box while you're interacting with it, putting your things into it, and then go find the brand, go directly to the company. Hey, I want to order a couple of those. Wow. Wow.
And even came up with the power tool to get into it.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah. Yeah. This guy, these guys were just, there was such a level of creativity. I hope they carry that creativity forward. On Crime After Crime, we talked about DB Tuber.
Yeah.
And this guy was just so creative, pulled off a bank robbery, almost got away with it, but got busted, did his time, came out, and he's refunneled that creativity into writing children's books. I hope we see similar things, because the creative nature of these guys is inspiring in a situation like this. Imagine if they actually, redirected that towards art, music, movies, books, whatever.
Well, one thing that I did notice in all of these articles is that everybody's story is just slightly different. Every script and book that they come up with are just slightly different. And when you ask them about those discrepancies, they're like, well, it's the truth according to me.
Right. Yeah. It's all in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah.
All right, Christy, thank you so much. We really appreciate all your work on this, and I've got some other people to thank right now. Thank you, PayPal supporters Mark Witt, Hillary Green, Brandy Fry, and Jennifer Dixon. If you'd like to support the channel, please visit lordandarts.com. There you can sign up for Patreon, sign up for PayPal, buy merchandise, or even just buy us a coffee, like Tracy Wilson did. We know that learning about the mechanisms that help support and find justice in these cases is important to understand the many unsolved cases we also cover, and we really appreciate your support in allowing us to continue doing that. Remember, you can get another Lord and Art story every week on the Seriously Mysterious podcast. A new episode is coming tomorrow and every Tuesday after that. Visit seriouslymysterious.com and remember to subscribe on your favorite podcatchers. Also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button now and that bell icon if you want to catch one of our weekly Secret Studio live shows. And of course, I'll be back with a new unsolved mystery for you on Friday, right here on the Lord and Arts channel.